Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal's Polyglot Software Development Podcast. Our guest today is Christoph Steinlehner. Christoph is a product management coach. He helps product managers and leaders who feel stuck in their work, caught up in endless detailed discussions, and struggling to facilitate between different perspectives by using visual mapping methods. Christoph, it's nice to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Krish. It's really nice to be here and to be interviewed by a neighbor. So based in Washington, D.C., and we just discovered that you're in Northern Virginia, so nearby. Very cool.
Lovely. And I want to say, if I'm not wrong, you're probably the first guest who happens to be located in the metro area here, so which is pretty cool. I know I read out an introduction, but if you could sort of introduce yourself to our audience, Christoph, and just talk a little bit about your background and what you do, and then we can jump right into the topic.
Of course, yeah. So, as you said very well, I'm a product management coach and consultant. So, I help product managers and also product leaders to communicate clearer, to find like the focus and clarity, to define like clear next steps, and also often to like navigate just their day-to-day chaos. As we all know, this job is draining. But I wasn't like all the time a product coach. I started my career in web development and then moved more down the design route and then jumped over, as many do, to the product management field, where I worked in a lot of different roles in like oftentimes heavily regulated companies in health tech, in fintech, in education. And then went a couple years back into the product coaching field. So I'm happy to be here.
Lovely. That gives us good context, and then we're going to jump into the topic. And our audience knows that we try to stick to the topic for the most part. But I would be guilty as charged if I deviate from the topic, because as we have these conversations, we learn a bit more about each other during the call, and it leads to a bit of digression, but it's interesting nevertheless. But the topic for the day is a couple of topics kind of combined together. Breaking through endless discussion circles and aligning your product team is the main topic. But we're also going to talk about how product managers leverage visual methods to clarify their thinking. So we have like about 40 minutes or so. We could just split that to the extent possible. So let's start with breaking through endless discussion circles. In other words, what is the pain point that we're talking about here? And let's first discuss the pain points, and then we can discuss the solutions.
Yeah. So in my work in a lot of different companies, I saw this pattern where people go into meetings, they have an hour-long discussion, and they come out, and the last thing they discuss is like when to meet next. And they realize like there was not that much outcome of the meeting. It was a little bit like unclear because they went down some rabbit holes. There were some detailed discussions going on. And and so meeting after meeting, it got more confusing than more enlightenment. And I don't know if you ever saw this, Krish. A lot of my clients see it also. So
No, absolutely right. So one of the pain points is meetings, right? So let's break it down, and then we can dig deeper into each of them. What are some other pain points that you can think of, Christoph?
yeah, so connected to this, oftentimes it's quite hard to isolate the next step. So we develop products, they're complex, there are a lot of ideas around them. We quickly jump from like, oh, that's a customer need, oh, that's a technical issue to solve, how to connect these things. So we have a lot of different perspectives in these meetings. And it's often not easy to isolate what's the next smart move to do instead of trying to solve the big puzzle in one go.
Makes sense, right? So let me ask this. So if we took, engineering and the way we build software continually evolves, right? It changes. How we did it today, yesterday is different from hopefully how we do it today. And as generative AI and more of these technologies come into the mix of things, things are going to change quite dramatically.
Yeah.
But with that said, if we took 3 decades ago, right, or 2 decades ago, or even
Mm,
5 decades ago, perhaps before each of us started working, there were meetings. People did build, whether it's software the way we're building it today or slightly differently.
mm,
So even though the software itself has changed, the stack has changed, it's still people, right? Humans were building it, and up until today, it might change tomorrow, but up as of the time of this recording, it's still humans being actively involved. And we know that meetings help in some ways and not help in other ways. And the other problems you discussed, the problems itself, would you agree, haven't necessarily changed over the years? So why is it that those problems still seem to exist? In other words, should we have not have learned this as a human race, like 20 years ago, decided, what, meetings work, meetings don't work, here is the methodology to go with, here is what's proven? Why is it that we are repetitively finding ourselves in a position that things are not working, even though the problem in that sense hasn't actually dramatically changed?
yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. So, um, we really have to collaborate, and that's why we do meetings. Why we even like say, "Oh, we have to talk." Um, what we often miss, in my experience, is that verbal communication is quite tricky, because to bring a point across just verbally and getting like the translation from my picture in a head through my words to you to form a picture in your head is like quite a complicated way. And I found out that by visualizing your ideas, by just writing them down on sticky notes in the end and bringing this in some form of a model, helps you to get to a like clear understanding, to be sure that you're even talking about the same thing. Because how often does it happen? We go into a conversation, we come out and be like, oh yeah, finally I got my point across. And 2 weeks later, I have the exact same discussion, the exact same, like, oh no, again, I thought we finally agreed on this.
Right. No, makes sense, right? So in other words, I was going to dig a little bit deeper into it. The problems haven't changed in that sense. It's people still working with each other.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I can think of as to why these problems seem to exist, the ones you brought to the table, here's my take on it. Yep, we are people. There were people 30 years ago, 50 years ago, working on building software and other things. And 50 years down the road, there are going to be people doing it, at least for the most part. But the way you approach the solving of these problems tends to change. And I'm wondering whether that causes some of these problems to resurface themselves. And here's what I mean by those mixed bag of words. What I mean is, when you build software, probably many years ago, the tools you had at your disposal were very different from the tools you have today. People were probably co-located. They all drove down. In our example, they all drove down to DC. I would go to from Northern Virginia to DC, and we start work at like 9 o'clock. We end at 6, and we are sort of working in the same environment at the workplace. That is one of the things that has also changed, right? That's two. Three, now even with remote teams, you just don't have remote teams just in the US. Like, we are located in the DC metro, but it's likely your team is located in other parts of the country, probably other parts of the world as well. So there's a cultural element to this. How people work on a project in India is quite different from how people work on a project in the US. We're all building software, yet there are some differences, and sometimes they are profound differences, and that adds to these challenges. So, I mean, is that fair enough to say that even though it's the underlying problems themselves didn't change, the way we have to solve them changes because of all of these metrics that continually evolve and change?
Yeah, so part of it. So I think you make a very interesting point here, that also through like multicultural working to getting like more global teams to working asynchronously and things like that, we harden even the problems we already got. So we
Right.
already have like communication as a tricky field, but we even made that harder for ourselves. At the same time, people communicated like from the first days on with drawings on a wall. They use tools to communicate to each other. And I think somehow also we lost it a little bit because we are really going into a text-based world. We are maybe just communicating via Slack. We are just communicating via documents and things like that because we think that's the easier way to communicate. But I truly believe in this collaboration mode where we bring different perspectives to the table and discuss them together. And that's also why I used a lot of existing methods. So I don't propose completely new ways how to visualize systems. I package up these methods in a meta method, I would say, the mapper method.
Okay. So, as you were talking, since we mentioned visualization, I figured, let's just live the practice of what we are trying to preach here. So I try to draw something up as simple as it is. Let me share my screen so we can add to this as we go. So tell me if you see my screen.
Yeah, now I see your screen.
Okay, so I'm just
I love
jotting it down.
this.
These are just
Yeah,
simple items we're talking about, but we've mentioned visualization, and I
yeah.
think in that context, just seeing some of what we're talking about here during the next 30 minutes, uh, and I truly believe in this as much as yourself, Christoph, because it reiterates, right? A picture is, as they say, worth 1,000 words. So it kind of helps capture this. But let me go into some of what you actually said earlier. You mentioned it wasn't particularly productive relying on tools like Slack and so on. But you also mentioned you did promote collaboration. What is I'm missing something there, but what's the
Mhm.
difference between the two? I thought the whole premise of Slack and other tools is to facilitate collaboration, right? So what does it
Yeah,
mean to kind of not want to use it but still be pro collaboration?
yeah. So text is a quite one-dimensional communication method, and we all know that it's pretty easy, especially in short messages, to go into misunderstandings. So we abstract too much. And I think in my experience, having something like a virtual whiteboard, which you're just sharing here, um, and building up together a model of our understanding helps to clarify if we are on the same page about the thing. So usually I propose when people start to think about their product, to think about their customer journey, to map this quickly out.
Okay. So in other words, let's just
Yeah.
I'm trying to let's try to get a little bit more specific in that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
let's go what just to wrap up on the meetings part. We said too many meetings, and you don't come. There's not a whole lot accomplished in these meetings, and I think one of the Amazon's rules, if I remember correctly, was no matter how big the whatever it is they're talking about, if two pizzas or two large pizzas couldn't feed the folks in the room, then there's too many people in the room, is what I had read
Hmm.
from Amazon's way of functioning. So what do you recommend to people who are a little bit caught between the devil and the deep sea, where what, we need to be able to meet with people to kick off things, collaborate, and be productive, yet we don't want to be in too many meetings, and some roles like meetings a bit more than others. I can speak for the development community, even at the risk of generalization. A lot of the developers do not necessarily appreciate meetings. They feel like it's taking away from a core part of their day.
Yeah.
So how do we? What are your recommendations towards meetings? Like, what works
Yeah.
and what doesn't work, and then we can go to the next item.
Yeah. So I think one crux a lot of people have with meetings is that it feels like non-work because you're sitting there and it's like you're talking in completely abstraction to what you then should do. And by working together on an artifact like a visual, you can really make tangible progress instead of having abstract conversation. So going out of a meeting with a clear picture of what your next steps are, then also helps you to work. So let's get a little bit more concrete. So imagine you have a meeting in your team. You're the product manager. You have 3 engineers in there, a designer in there, and they're discussing about a functionality for a tea timer app.
Okay.
And they're going through the steps. So what's needed to do this thing? So what is the goal of the user? The goal of the user is to have a cup of tea. The first step probably is that they start to have even an interface to get like a timer. Then they can go through the steps the user is taking and can discuss like, okay, what's the order of the steps, maybe what technical systems are needed, maybe what they don't know yet. So there are a lot of assumptions always in the room. They think they need maybe a database for all the tea kinds. Maybe they should talk to some users about this, if this is even a need. And with that, they can pretty quickly form a picture together and decide on the next actions.
Okay, so those are great points. So essentially, it comes down to problem solving, then, right? When people ask me, "Hey, Krish, what is the biggest skill that you or Snowpal could bring to the table?" We almost
Mm.
always say more than engineering. We say it's problem solving because whatever you
Mm.
just mentioned, there, Christoph, is quite agnostic, in my opinion, to the world of engineering and software development, right?
Yeah.
What you say there is true pretty much for any business that you happen to be in. You go into a space to solve, you get into a room with a bunch of people, whether it's a virtual room or a physical room,
Mm.
and you have a problem in mind and you want to come out with either a defined agreed solution, and more often than not you may not have it in the initial meetings, but at least you want to have a plan towards, okay, here is what we wanted to solve, here are the things that we discussed, and here is what we are coming out of. Now again, when we state this, when I put that in words and say it, it seems pretty obvious, correct? It seems like, hey, you
Mm.
know what, how else could you possibly do this? You have a
Mm.
problem, you go into a room, you're talking to people,
Mm.
everybody has good intent, they're trying to come and address this problem, they're throwing out their solutions, potential answers, and then we pick the best one that we can actually collectively build as a team with
Mm.
the money that we have available and in the time that we have available, so we go about doing things. Now this, when I say it, I feel like, yep, sure, I mean, what did I mean, there's not so much a revelation.
Yeah.
That's how things should be, and that, no, things couldn't be any other way.
Yeah.
Yet we know that that doesn't end up being the case. So what, who's the culprit here? Is it the people in the room who are not in agreement to how you want to approach the problem, or is it ego, different kinds of egos playing a role where, hey, should it be my opinion versus your opinion? Is it culture? Is it technology and skill sets? Because if I don't know what I'm talking about to the extent that Christoph knows, then I'm going to be spewing whatever, right? Not talking a whole lot of sense in that scenario. So if you want to just, given that this is a very hypothetical team,
Mm.
it's easy to have this conversation, because if Christoph and Krish were part of this real team, then it's going to be difficult to point, you don't want to point fingers at one another or each other, right? But given
Yeah.
that this is a hypothetical team, and given what I've just mentioned there, how do you propose, in your experience, how do you resolve these things? Like, what are some common problems that you've run into that actually preclude a positive, useful outcome from coming out of a meeting, and how have you gone about trying to make that better?
Yeah. So the one point you already mentioned is that we have this cross-functional teams with different perspectives. So product manager comes with a different mindset to the table as an engineer. Often an engineer might think automatically, just by his knowledge and by his training, about like, okay, how do we solve this technically? A product manager is more thinking probably about like, okay, how does this attract the right users? How does this work for the business? A designer might think more about, okay, how can we provide this in a usable way?
Right.
And along with these perspectives, we automatically will go down this thought, this topic. If I'm in a meeting and I'm talking to you as an engineer, probably you will automatically go a little bit more in the technical direction, just because that's like what's the first thing on your mind. And then we maybe talk not anymore directly to each other, but going a little bit against each other. By bringing this into an external format, like a visual tool, we can start to talk about the thing we are seeing in front of us. We are not in our minds anymore. We are not about like already imagining a lot of things. We are talking together about whatever we visualized.
Okay. So you mentioned one thing that caught my attention there, which is you said, hey, the product manager in the call has a slightly different agenda, right, than the developer on the call. Each of them has to solve the same problem, but their role is different. You mentioned the engineer, the developer tends to be a little bit more technical because that's kind of what they do. uh, Let me take that statement is true, and I agree for the most part. Here's where I have a slightly different opinion there,
Mm.
simply because as we're talking in late towards the latter part of 2024, with all the tools that are available out there to developers and to everybody else, Copilot and GitHub Copilot and whatnot, the gap is trying to be bridged, I want to say. In other words, uh, folks who are not building software actively as a developer are starting to do it, and sort of vice versa. Like a product manager last year, a year before, probably was hands off for the most part, right? They were not necessarily writing code. Now in startups, given the fact that a product manager understands the problem, even if they don't have a coding background, they could literally be using an IDE with the support of all of these tools that guides them to actually generate this code. I mean, that's the way the world appears to be progressing from a
Yeah.
generative AI perspective, at least, right?
Yeah.
So do you agree that that gap is being bridged, or am I sort of jumping the gun saying, yeah, it's happening, but not at the pace that I'm actually assuming that it isn't? There's one caveat here.
Hmm.
We live in the DC metro, and here it's a lot of government work that happens, right? So I don't want to speak to the pace of work, but things are a little bit different. Like as a product company, I can say as a product company located on the East Coast, it's always a bit of a challenge for us. It's not to say that there aren't other startups. There's plenty of awesome startups on the East Coast, but you might agree that they're disproportionate in number in terms of how many of them are there on this side of the country versus the West Coast, like Seattle and the Bay Area and whatnot, which means a lot of what I'm speaking to, because we work plentiful with folks on the other side of the country. That's what I'm seeing, but that may or may not necessarily be the case in the DC metro. So this could be region centric, but leaving that apart, do you see product managers taking more of a development role, like an active maybe don't write as much code as an average developer might, but do you see product managers actually become more technical in that sense going forward?
Yeah. So to your first point, I think like as long as it's a one person show, you don't have meetings, you don't have this issue. You can do whatever you want. Maybe like before going into code, having some representation of it helps. I'm pretty sure about that. Um, to your other question, if like product managers go more into a technical role, yeah and no. So I think the new tools allow individuals and also in teams to prototype better, to get like quicker to something they can present, they can discuss. Um, at the same time, I'm not seeing currently that a product manager can do like complex architecture. I think still like the most part of engineering is not writing the function. It's like creating on one hand really the bigger pieces and put them together, and then also to know what's the right approaches. So what's the right solution there? What's the easiest technical solution? Even if like OpenAI or Copilot or all the other tools help me to express like an idea, I think we are still far away from having a full-fledged product, which is robust, does what exactly we want to do, is secure, and so on, just built by some prompts.
Fair enough, right? And then when you start working with the other stakeholders, like in our case, you took two examples of a product manager and a developer. What should their collaboration look like? In other words, let me take two extremes, right? I mean, extremes
Hmm?
in a nicer way, actually, which is one, you come to a meeting, you talk a lot of theory, quote unquote, meaning you maybe
Hmm?
draw diagrams, you have these conversations, jot
Hmm?
down, maybe create tickets, etc. And then each of them they go about their way to continuing their work for the rest of the day.
Hmm?
Or do you think these two stakeholders, as different as their objectives are, actually be collaboratively working and creating the sort of pairing to building the software? So let's say Christoph is a product manager and Chris is a developer.
Hmm?
Should the two of us be literally be pairing, like doing pair programming to building this? In other words, you're there, you're like, hey Chris, this is what this page should look like, and we keep talking about it. Rather than we jot that down, create a diagram, put that on a ticketing system and track to it. Should in a smaller startup environment,
Hmm?
would it make sense for the two of us or the four of us to be in a call and sort of just literally work together by screen sharing and being actively collaborating, even if we are not co-located?
Yeah. Um, for some situations, that totally makes sense. So, especially like as I said, I worked as a designer. I did that often with engineers. I sit together and tweaked an animation, did like the final things on like how exactly something should behave. For the most part, I think like a designer, a product manager, a legal person, a salesperson, um, sitting next to a developer, I'm not sure if that's the best like use of their time. Um, so I'm deeply believing in pairing between developers, pairing for certain situations between different roles, like working on the actual code. But as you know, a lot of things are like legwork. A lot of things are like, okay, you have to set up the environment. You have to think about like how exactly this is working, how this fits together. Um, Not sure if it's helping if then a PM is sitting next by, understanding 5% of it and be like, yeah, you wanna like call this variable differently?
Right. Okay. No, fair enough. So let's say now the product manager had the conversation with the developer. They go about their ways to build. But when, let's say, out of these initial meetings, one of the things you mentioned at the top of the call was you gave an example of the example of the tea and that scenario. How much? Let's say we're building a simple page, right? Let's take a very fair, high level yet sort of concrete example. We're building a simple page. It has a backend dependency. The page does X, Y, and Z. There's a few buttons, some colors there. And then you, as a product manager, let's say you're the product manager for both the UI and the backend teams, and you're defining, helping define these requirements. In that first meeting, what do you want to leave with? In other words, if you could just walk us through the design of that page, right? Let's say you come to the meeting, you had the requirements in mind. You have to build a page, but you haven't thought through what the page should look like, or you don't have any more details
Hmm.
about it. The developer, there's a UI developer and a backend developer in the call as well. So the three of you are just getting started with that call. How should that conversation progress in
Hmm.
breaking that development of that page down?
Yeah, so I think that the first question is like, what do we want to achieve with this? So what's really the goal of this page? And then probably before writing any line of code, we make up our minds what we already know, what is needed for that, and tease out the assumptions in there. Because we assume probably that the customer, user of this page, will do a certain thing. But we probably don't know because we have no evidence of that. So we go into a small prototyping, or we just ensure ourselves by talking to a couple of users if this is even the task they are struggling with currently.
But Christoph, that should have been done before we got to the call, right? I mean, is it not too late if we have to do it after we got on this call? So I assume that there is a page that we do want to build. So we surely have those requirements, and all of the research was already done. now we are at the point where we're actually kicking off the building of this page. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah, but we already have like probably first parts of how the thing should look. And maybe we already have like the first technical steps because we launched a prototype. We launched something. So that's like my usual approach, that you pretty quickly like and automatically move from first sketches, first interviews to prototypes to first code artifacts. And that's often done in a very short time.
Right. So, in other words, when I go to this meeting, I had requirements. So, just to be clear, is the product manager in this case coming to that first meeting with a rough design, or are they actually doing the design while they're on the call, saying, "Hey, this is how I need this page to do X, Y, and Z," but I have almost no idea because I've not spent the time in figuring out where the button should be, how big or small the button should be, and what other components should this page comprise of, because there's two ways to do it essentially, right? One is a bit more formal way of doing it where you come hyper prepared to this, and that is true in larger organizations, perhaps maybe even government organizations where there is a sense of formality. But when it's becomes more commercial, and then the smaller the company, you may not have enough people all the time to coming to those meetings with that preparation. So sometimes the preparation actually happens literally in that first call. So in your experience, it sounds like to me it's more the former, right, where you've done all of the prep work before you came to this meeting.
So I would expect that the developers are already involved in the thinking before. So that they already know what customer problem we are solving. They already maybe also prototyped some technical approach to this. They also brought their ideas because, like, as we know, engineers often have like the best solutions to complicated problems. So I would expect that, like, from the beginning on, when we think about the customer problem, that also engineering members are involved in this process. I wouldn't expect that a product manager comes in with uh, like all these things and already like a final design or something like that, and then just ask people to please do that. I really would expect that people collaborate together and people are already from the first stages on involved in shaping this product. Because
Sure. Makes sense. And as we get to the end of this, what are some approaches that actually you see has worked, and what are some things that you've seen that, what, we've tried this time and again, and it just doesn't work? Are there some things that are obvious but not so obvious where you could say that this has almost always worked for me? I kind of like to go with this approach, and then there are some that don't work for us.
yeah, so what's working is really going into another medium, so going into a visual medium, and put this on a wall, on a virtual whiteboard. And the interesting thing is that I see that also, like, with a lot of engineers, they're whiteboard. It's pretty common that engineers together whiteboard. Why don't we do that also in the cross-functional work, like
Right. Okay.
above the engineering stack, above, like, oh, we have to see how the connections are. Oh, what's the customer journey? What are like the KPIs also we want to influence, things like that, to bring like this knowledge into the team. What's not working is a lot of things, of course. But I think that the biggest confusion still is often that we try to outthink complex problems. We are not calling out our assumptions and testing them before going further down this route. Especially if you look at startups, see too many startups, they have like spent 6 months creating something and then confronting the first time their potential customer with their final product or with their version 1 or the MVP of a thing before they understood really their customer, before they tried a couple of things, before they prototyped a lot of things, and they discovered the right way how to do this. I think that's a big challenge.
Makes sense, right? So I know the last half an hour I've been throwing questions at you. It's always the easier thing to do. I know we have like about 10 minutes to go. Do you have questions for me? Like any questions that I could answer so that could help our audience as well?
Yeah, for sure. So I would be interested. So you are shaping a product. What are your current like harder things to break through? What is like confusing for you?
Is it from a product management standpoint, Christoph, or is it from an overall
From
building standpoint?
from your standpoint, just
Yeah,
for
so
Chris.
so there's no let me in terms of background, right? So I've been building software for a long time. uh, we launched our company, at least the product part of a company, about 5 years ago, and we have like a web app in production, a mobile app in production. I can, just because we've talked visuals, let me actually, share as we talk about this, and I'll answer your question as we go, right? So we first launched our mobile app, which is like a project management platform, right? You can log in and do whatever you expect of a typical product management platform. We do that, and we have some more, right? We try to build this to solve a certain set of problems, and we did this. This was the first app that we built. Now, when we built this, we had a responsive web app, right? We didn't have a native mobile app at the time. And we were like, you know what? I think it's fine. We are a small company. Folks will be okay with the web version of it. And then, what they do on the go, they'll be okay with the responsive web version, because, even Fidelity, as from what I can tell, didn't build their native mobile apps for a long time as a large company. But as it turned out, the initial feedback we got was, oh, where is the mobile app? Can I not do this? I mean, there is a responsive web app, but that's not good enough. So we had to switch gears and change the way, we had different things in our roadmap. So we changed it and started building our web app, sorry, our mobile app. And then we built it, pushed it to the app and Play stores. When we pushed it to the app and Play stores, Christoph, we had the first version of the app had Facebook login support and regular login, right? I'm just giving you a very not a manufactured problem, but a real problem.
Hmm.
When we sent it to the App Store immediately rejected the first version, saying, "Hey, you know what? If you have the Facebook login supported, we have a new requirement that you need to have Apple login also. If you do not have any social media login, then it's fine. But if you have one, you need to have us." At the time, it sounded a bit childish, but they're a 3.4 trillion number one biggest company in the world, so it doesn't matter whether I think it's childish or not. You got to do what you have to do. So after we try to push it, our app got approved on the Play Store, and now we have a placed Android app, but not an Apple, iOS app. So there's a bit of a sticky situation because we are predominantly selling to folks in the US and some in Europe as well, where I know iPhones predominantly, are, I guess they have 50% of the market share here, right? So that caused a lot of challenges. So we had to rush through our change our requirements, realign everything we did, and started working on the mobile app, right? That's the second thing. I'm just giving you a long-winded answer to your question. The third thing we did was, after we did all of this, we wanted to showcase a certain set of functionality. But for us to do that, right, Christoph, they say, we always say MVP, right? But the challenge with the MVPs is, what do you build so you prove your point? Because sometimes you want to showcase one little thing, but unless you have the foundational elements built, we cannot even showcase the thing that you actually want to showcase. So there is a very it's sort of a chicken and egg story in some cases, because you want to build something and show to your investors, to your community, but I need an application that's deployed that does a few fundamental things for me to actually prove that point. Like, for instance, what I'm trying to say here is, if I'm going to this page for whatever this page is worth, and let's say I want to showcase charts and I want to show what charts were, let's pretend that this is all I wanted to show to my investors or to my user community, but I still needed the whole app to in some form, way or shape. Now, it doesn't have to look pretty or beautiful, but it still needs to be there. So there was a challenge of building things that we didn't initially want to build because we wanted to showcase something else, and we needed a foundation to be able to build that. So what we have now done is, actually we started supporting APIs for third parties and other people to consume. So you can go to the API hubs or AWS Marketplace to consume Snowpile APIs. This is the third thing that we did, but we discovered all of this organically, right? When we launched the first version of the product, we didn't expect to be where we are at today. And this is probably true for every company that's out there. I don't believe YouTube started out as like a video sharing platform, or I've read most of them don't start out where they are at. So I think one of the biggest challenges, I think, as a startup, as whether you're small or big, is you cannot be married to your original ideas. And it's very natural that you kind of married to them because, hey, I started this, I spent a lot of time and money and effort, and it's phenomenal. I'm going to, take it to my grave, but that's not going to help. Accepting that everything that you've done in the last 3 months or 6 months was good learning, but not exactly what the market might want, or probably there is not the traction you're expecting for it to be. I think is the single biggest challenge in being running a company and being an entrepreneur, right? So I wouldn't say there are days you wake up and, you know what, I want to break from what I'm doing. So let me actually pick up a contract and do managed services work. It seems bizarre because you don't want to take a break and like go to Europe or go to the Swiss Alps. You actually want to take a break and do work for other people because here Christoph is going to tell me, Krish, go and build this page. Yeah, I have to do some work, but at least I have to be a developer, and that's a whole lot easier than having this holistic approach of building every piece in that puzzle.
Hmm.
So to me, that is the I don't know if it answers your question, but that was the broad answer to some of the very, very difficult challenges that we run into as a startup on a daily basis.
Yeah, thanks for sharing this. Very interesting because yeah, I think that's exactly the I think the art of developing products is like how to find out quicker what works and what doesn't work. So how to minimize the work we can put into something or we need to put into something to find out if this is the right route or if we have to change the route, if it's the right problem we are attacking, and also if it's the right solution, because that's also like two separate things. We can identify an amazing problem, but we might have a hard time to find the solution, or we in the first place just identify the problem, which is not really a problem. Somebody want to like spend money on it.
Absolutely right. And you've shared some wonderful points in the last 40 minutes, right? But as we wrap up this call, Christoph, first of all, thanks for your time. But as we wrap up, what would your closing comments be? And more specifically to this sort of a question, which is, say someone's watching this, they're learning from you as a product coach and a
Hmm.
consultant. You've done this a while, I presume, and they are maybe out of college, they're new, or they've done this a little bit, but they're not in the space of product management.
Hmm.
What would your advice be? How do you recommend that somebody maybe even out of college who's not done this is getting started? And if somebody's done this but not exactly what we've talked about here, but they have some experience in the space of building software,
Hmm.
what would you recommend to both those parties, right? One with no experience almost, and the other with some experience but not direct experience.
Yeah. So coming into product management with directly from college, I think it's tricky. I don't see, to be honest, like a lot of people directly go into a product role. A lot of people come from an engineering background, come from a design background, come from a customer support background, come from a marketing background. So all the roles in product, which are oftentimes also have like a clearer path from universities, colleges, often then break into product. So that's one thing. The other thing is start to build stuff. As soon as you start to build stuff, you're a product person. You have to work through all these challenges you just described, Krish, which is like the pinnacle of product management. For everybody who is already like in a technical team or in a customer support team or somewhere where they see product people, product managers working, start to collaborate with them, start to watch their fingers. What are they doing? Try to help out and also make clear to like your hiring manager that you might be interested in switching the role and what would it take. So every company is a little bit different. Also, the product management job can be quite different between different companies. So see where you can learn and see where your path is shaping and be clear about that. This is something you're interested in. And then ask in your company, can I help you? Can I join this meeting? Can I be like your left hand for a couple of weeks just to get the ropes in?
Those are very clear and specific answers, and it's awesome. Thank you. And my last question to you is probably the easiest question or the most difficult one, depending on how you look at it, is going to be, what is your I ask this of all my guests. What is your favorite dish? What do you like to eat? Like, of what you like to eat, what is your favorite dish? And if it's not something that the larger community that's watching this might understand, if you could just explain a bit about what that dish is as well.
That's a tricky question. I don't know. So I think like my long-term favorite dish since childhood is probably schnitzel. So I'm German. Like a good schnitzel is very nice. I
Can you
really love
can you
it.
explain that, please? I have no idea what
A
it is.
okay, a schnitzel is like a piece of veal, usually, like a really thin piece of veal, deep fried.
How do you spell it?
Schnit. Yeah,
Ah, here I go.
exactly. So traditional, like Austrian original dish, but I'm from southern Germany. There it's also pretty common. Exactly.
Okay, that's great. Since you're in the DC metro, I would have said I actually might give it a shot, but unfortunately, I'm vegetarian, so I'm gonna have to find a vegan or
There,
veggie version of Schnitzel.
I think there are pretty decent veggie versions of that.
Okay, except that the veggie versions of anything doesn't look anything like the original, doesn't taste anywhere close to the original dish. So
Sometimes it's really about like the fried piece also.
praise
So
also. This is
yeah,
awesome. So, Christoph, one more time. Again, folks, we had this great conversation with Christoph Steinlehner, who's a product coach and consultant. I'm going to include Christoph's links, link to your LinkedIn profile, or any other links that you want for us to include, so folks can reach out to you, for a variety of different reasons. Um, Thank you so much, Christoph. This was great. Just understanding and learning, sort of product perspectives from somebody who thankfully, not thankfully, but also happens to be in the area. So it's kind of nice, just to understand how, uh, what are some of the things that have shaped your experience. And then finally, your closing comments is to the advice to two sets of communities, which is the newer, college grads and folks who've done this a bit, was actually spot on as well. So thanks so much.
thank you for having me. And to all the listeners, feel free to reach out. I'm also having for the Mapper Method a small guide. So if you reach out, I'm happy to send it because we had luckily a little bit of visual content here. But if you're interested to dive a little bit deeper, just reach out. I'm always happy to chat.
Awesome. Yep, we'll include the link to your profile on LinkedIn, so it's great. Awesome.
Perfect.
Folks,
Cool.
that's about it for today. Thanks to Christoph again for joining. Till until next time.